Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is pretty simple. We take these huge, complex ideas, the ones usually buried in academic papers or these really dense books, and we try to boil them down to what you actually need to know. The context, the important details, and hopefully some of those facts that, really stick with you. And today we're doing a deep dive that's a bit different. We're turning our focus completely inward. We're going to be looking at the architecture of our own minds, specifically how we deal with that constant stream of self-talk, the emotions that seem to dictate everything from how we perform at work to, well, how happy we are at home. Our focus today is a concept called emotional agility, and it's based on the really rigorous work of Susan David, who's a PhD psychologist.
Yeah.
We're getting into this because, let's be honest, most of us are just exhausted by our own minds. We need a better way, maybe a shortcut, to just navigate the sheer noise that's going on inside our heads all the time. And think about this for a second. The research behind this points out that on an average day, you might speak about 16,000 words out loud. But internally, inside your own head, you're generating tens of thousands more.
Yeah.
It's like a constant, nonstop internal radio broadcast.
And it's not a very friendly broadcast most of the time, is it?
Not at all. And that's the real hook here, where the problem starts. These internal stories, these rapid-fire, really judgmental opinions from our inner voice, they don't feel like opinions. They land in our brain as, unshakable facts.
It's like they're the absolute truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just a thought that, maybe I'm not ready for this. It feels like a fundamental truth. I am not good enough to present my work.
Or I'm a terrible parent because I work late again.
Yes. We've all been stuck in that loop. And when your mind treats those opinions as facts, what happens? You freeze. You avoid giving the presentation, or you just spiral into guilt. So today, we're exploring a path that promises to move us beyond that kind of paralysis, toward achieving what the author calls genuine, values-based success.
And that's precisely why this framework has gained so much attention. It's because it addresses a universal problem, but it does it with a huge amount of academic rigor. This isn't pop psychology.
No, not at all.
The researcher we're talking about, Susan David, she's a very serious academic. She's a psychologist. She's on the faculty at Harvard Medical School.
Wow.
And her work is built on a really solid foundation. I'm talking a postdoctorate in emotions research from Yale. So this concept, emotional agility, it's the result of more than 20 years of academic work.
Okay.
But it's also combined with all this consulting she's done with global companies, and this is crucial, her own personal experience with overcoming some really serious adversity early in her life.
So it's both academic and deeply personal.
It is. And when we look at the goal here, it's not just about, feeling a little bit better. It's about profound transformation. It's about learning how to get unstuck, how to embrace change, and ultimately how to thrive, both at work and well in life.
Which is the whole game, really.
It is. And what's so fascinating to me is how different this approach is from all that traditional advice we get about stress. We're always told to just avoid stress or just be positive.
Like just push through it, suppress the bad feeling.
Exactly. And we all know how well that works. Trying not to feel something just makes it stronger, right? David's work suggests a total shift. It's not about avoiding the stress. It's about fundamentally changing how you relate to it, how you relate to that inner turmoil and those unshakable stories. It's a system for turning all that internal friction into, believe it or not, useful information.
Okay, so let's really unpack that core problem she's targeting, this cognitive burden created by the sheer volume and the judgmental nature of our own internal monologue. We said tens of thousands of thoughts a day.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually do the math on that over a lifetime, the conversations you have inside your own head are just exponentially larger than every conversation you'll ever have with another person.
It's staggering when you think of it that way.
It is. And we touched on this, but the critical part is that these thoughts are rarely just neutral observations like, oh, this sky is blue. They are overwhelmingly, evaluative. They're judgmental. They're self-critical.
That's absolutely right. These are the thoughts that just chip away at your confidence. They undermine any kind of intentional action you're trying to take. So, if you're a new manager, that thought is probably, I have no idea what I'm doing. Any minute now, they're going to find out I'm a fraud.
The imposter syndrome.
Classic imposter syndrome. Or if you're trying to start a new health kick, it's that voice saying, I'm just too weak for this. I'll never stick with it.
Right.
And the danger, according to Dr. David, isn't the thought itself. It's a psychological process she calls cognitive fusion.
Fusion, okay.
Fusion is what happens when your mind processes these judgmental opinions as if they were established, unchangeable facts. So when you are fused with the thought, I am a failure, your brain literally stops asking questions. It just starts running the script for what a failure does.
That makes so much sense. If I genuinely believe, as a fact, that I am a failure, then my behavior is just going to follow that script. I'll avoid the big challenges. I'll procrastinate on the important projects.
You'll self-sabotage.
I'll self-sabotage anything that looks like success because it doesn't fit the fact that I'm a failure. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're basically trapped by your own internal editor.
And this is where the science behind it gets really interesting. From a cognitive science perspective, our brains evolve to be prediction machines. They are constantly scanning for threats. So that inner critic, as negative as it feels, is usually just trying to keep us safe.
By pointing out all our flaws so we don't take risks.
Exactly. It's pointing out perceived dangers. The problem is that in modern life, that threat detection system, which was great for avoiding predators, it just overfires constantly. The noise it creates is not helpful when you're just trying to run a team meeting.
Right. There are no saber-toothed tigers in the conference room.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
So this raises the most important question of all. If these relentless negative thoughts are just opinions from a cautious brain, not facts, how on earth do you create that distance? How do you break that cognitive fusion?
It sounds like you need a way to, I don't know, to veto your own brain without getting into an all-out war with it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the old approaches failed.
Right.
Right? They told you to just eliminate the thought or replace it with some kind of, cheesy positive affirmation.
Which is just exhausting, and it rarely works because a part of you knows you're just lying to yourself.
Exactly.
And that's why her premise is so different. It's pioneering a way to coexist with these inner voices, to make peace with them, but without giving them the power to make your decisions for you. So we're moving away from thought suppression. Don't think of a pink elephant.
Which just makes you think of a pink elephant.
Right. We're moving towards simply changing the relationship you have with the thought itself.
And the relevance of that is just enormous. It cuts across everything. We're talking self-help, psychology, stress management, personal success. Because that internal friction, that battle, is the one thing that undermines success in all those areas.
Absolutely. You can't be successful professionally if you're constantly paralyzed by a stress response that's being fueled by your own negative thoughts. The research is really aimed at helping you get to your most valued goals, to make real lasting change. But to do that, you have to be able to choose your path, and you can't choose your path if your internal critic has fused you to the belief that you're just not good enough.
Okay, so let's define the key difference here. Let's move from the problem to the solution. Because this is where emotional agility really separates itself from ideas like, just being resilient or having grit. People who are emotionally agile, they're not superhuman. They don't just sail through life without problems.
No.
They experience the exact same setbacks as everyone else. The company restructures, the market tanks, personal disappointments happen. They feel anxiety and sadness and frustration, all of it.
The key, like you said, isn't the absence of the struggle. It's the presence of choice. Agility is defined by the difference in the response. So when a big stressor hits, the agile person doesn't bypass the pain, but they refuse to be hijacked by it.
Okay, so how? What's the mechanism?
This ability to choose comes down to two core actions, and these are the twin pillars of agility. The first one is unhooking from unhelpful patterns.
Unhooking.
Unhooking. It's the practical way you achieve what we call cognitive diffusion. So instead of being swept away by a thought, being hooked by it, you learn to just observe it. For example, instead of thinking, I am panicking, you learn to create a little space and say, I am noticing that I'm having the thought that I am panicking.
That's such a subtle shift in language. I am X versus I'm noticing the thought that I am X. It sounds so simple, but I can see how that would be a huge cognitive leap.
It's massive.
It creates distance. It turns the thought from who you are into just a mental event that's happening, like watching a car drive by.
That's a perfect analogy. And that little bit of detachment is the absolute foundation for any kind of conscious, non-reactive behavior. If you're hooked, the thought controls the action. You avoid things, you lash out, you give up. If you're unhooked, the thought is just information, and it gives you the space to decide what to do next.
Okay, but let me push back on that a little bit, because this idea of treating all thoughts as just opinions, isn't that a bit dangerous?
Yeah.
I mean, what if the thought, I need to prepare more for this presentation, is actually a really important, accurate observation, not just noise?
That is an excellent and really necessary question. The framework doesn't say all thoughts are useless. Not at all. The difference is in the tone and the kind of mandate the thought gives you. And this brings us right to the second pillar of agility.
Okay.
So if the thought is super judgmental, it's paralyzing. If it's a sweeping statement like, I am always inadequate, that's cognitive fusion. That's a hook. But if the thought is descriptive and actionable, like, I need 2 more hours to review the Q3 financials, that's just useful information. An emotionally agile person doesn't just throw that out. They use their diffusion skills to observe both things, the judgmental opinion and the useful information, and then they pivot to the second core action,
Which is?
creating values-based success. Once you're unhooked from the fear and the self-judgment, you are finally free to act in a way that aligns with your deepest values. This is the ultimate test.
So if my inner critic is screaming, you're too nervous to present, and a more descriptive thought says, I am a little underprepared,
Yeah,
I first unhook from the judgment, I accept the nerves.
exactly. And then you ask the crucial question, what do my values demand of me right now?
So if one of my deepest values is, say, courage
Yeah.
or integrity,
Then that value is what compels you to act. It tells you to spend the 2 hours preparing and to show up and give the presentation, even with the nervousness. The action is now driven by your own internal compass, not by the emotional weather of the moment.
so this is how it all connects. It's a new way of relating to yourself. It's not just managing your emotions, which it sounds like you're trying to control them or suppress them. It's about using them.
Using them as data.
Right. So if I feel intense anger, that's information. It's probably telling me that a value I hold, like fairness or respect, has just been violated.
Mm.
It doesn't mean I have to scream at my coworker. It means I pause, I unhook from the rage, and I choose an action that's aligned with my value of, say, professional communication to address the problem constructively.
Precisely. Or if you feel anxiety, it's a sign that something you care deeply about is at stake. It's not a signal to run and hide. It's a signal to care, but to care wisely.
And that active choice, that's the core of agility. Listeners who've engaged with this work say it's very relevant and that it's a guide to handle your own emotions and choose your response wisely. The ability to choose is really the ultimate form of mental strength.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, becoming agile isn't something that just happens. It's not a sudden insight. Dr. David lays out a very clear 3-stage psychological path. You could call it the AAA process: awareness, acceptance, and action. This is the how-to guide.
Okay, well, let's break that down. Stage 1 is awareness.
Stage 1 is fundamental. Become aware of your true nature. This is the ongoing daily practice of just recognizing what that internal voice is actually doing. It's about creating space.
What does that mean, creating space?
It means practicing what psychologists call decentering. We talked about fusion, where you and the thought are one and the same. Decentering is the process of stepping back and seeing, I am having a thought, not I am the thought.
So it's about seeing the thought, not being the thought.
Exactly. It's what allows you to finally recognize that this internal chatterbox, the one producing tens of thousands of thoughts a day, is just offering up opinions, interpretations, and warnings. It is very, very rarely presenting an objective, unshakable reality.
Okay, let's use a real-world example. Say you get some tough but fair feedback on a project at work.
Perfect. So if you're fused with your thoughts, the immediate thought is, I failed, I am completely incompetent.
Right, and that causes an emotional crash.
Mm,
You feel shame, and your action might be to just shut down and avoid that manager from now on.
yes. But if you practice awareness, the mental script can change. It can become, okay, I am having the thought that I failed and I am feeling a wave of shame. By creating that little bit of distance, you stop the shame from becoming your entire identity. And that subtle shift is psychologically transformative. It gives you control over how you interpret the event, not just react to it.
And it's only when you can see it as a temporary event that you can move on to stage 2, which I assume is about dealing with that shame.
Exactly. Stage 2. Face emotions with acceptance and generosity. And this is where so much traditional self-help goes wrong, because our default is to fight the bad feeling. Acceptance is the powerful, if counterintuitive, antidote to that struggle.
We're told to bottle it up, and then it just explodes later.
It explodes, and it also takes up a huge amount of your mental energy. Trying to suppress anxiety is like wrestling with a shadow. The harder you fight it, the more exhausted you get. And all the energy you're spending trying to hold that anxiety down is energy you can't use for actually solving the problem or, connecting with your values.
So if fighting it is the wrong move, What does acceptance actually look like? If I'm feeling, say, deep guilt because I missed a family event for work, how do I accept that?
It starts with a word Dr. David uses, which is generosity.
Generosity.
Towards yourself and towards the emotion. It means allowing that feeling to be there without judging it, acknowledging its purpose, and treating yourself with some kindness instead of just beating yourself up.
So a non-generous response to guilt
Would be to immediately criticize the feeling itself. I shouldn't feel this guilty, or I'm such a bad person for feeling this. And now you've just added a whole second layer of self-judgment on top of the original pain. You're suffering about your suffering. A generous, accepting approach is different. First, you just label it without judgment. I'm noticing I'm feeling intense guilt right now. Then you can give it some physical space. Maybe you just go for a 5-minute walk, or you just allow the tension to sit in your shoulders without trying to immediately fix it. You are observing the guilt as information. It's telling you that your family is incredibly important to you, but you're not letting the guilt force you into some reactive behavior, like making some huge unsustainable promise you can't keep. You just allow it to be there.
So you learn from the emotion without being completely consumed by it. You see its function, but you don't let it take over.
And that leads directly to stage 3. Act according to your deepest values. This is the pivot. This is where all that internal work translates into real, meaningful, external success. Once you've unhooked from the judgment and you've accepted the difficult emotion, your actions can finally be guided by your values, not by fear or avoidance.
But how do people figure out what their deepest values are? They can feel so abstract, courage, transparency, connection. But our actions have to be concrete.
That's a great point. Values are often described as being like a compass, not a map. A goal is a destination on the map, like I will get a promotion this year. A value is the direction you are always trying to travel in, like I value professional growth and challenge.
So it's the direction, not the destination.
Exactly. And emotional agility asks that every time you choose an action, you check it against your compass. So let's go back to that tough feedback scenario. Your internal voice says, avoid that colleague, hide. But your value of professional growth points in a different direction. It compels you to schedule a follow-up meeting to ask clarifying questions.
Even though it feels scary?
Especially when it feels scary. That action taking the meeting is aligned with your value, even while the anxiety is still there. And that alignment, acting from your values instead of your fears, is what Dr. David calls true flourishing. You're building a version of success that's actually authentic to who you want to be.
And the research shows this is how you bridge that gap between your inner world and your outer professional achievement. It's not just soft skills. This is about emotions, leadership, management, and success. It fundamentally changes how you make decisions. So for anyone listening who is looking to build their mental strength and agility, this is, it's like a high-level operating system for your mind.
It is, but we have to remember the feedback from people who've actually tried to implement this. One really insightful comment was that to truly adopt these lessons, you have to engage with them repeatedly. You have to reinforce the concepts and apply them over and over in different situations.
So it's not a one-time fix.
Not at all. Emotional agility is a practice. It's a muscle you have to keep building because those tens of thousands of internal opinions, they don't just go away because you read a book. The work of unhooking is daily work, minute by minute sometimes.
Now, to really appreciate the reliability of this framework, I think it's important we understand the academic foundation behind it. This isn't just a good idea. It's grounded in decades of real psychological research.
Absolutely. We've mentioned her credentials, the PhD, the postdoctorate from Yale, being on faculty at Harvard Medical School. That alone tells you this is academically vetted and tested against data. It's rooted in a very deep understanding of human behavior, and it draws heavily from what are called third-wave cognitive behavioral therapies. Specifically, something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT.
And for our listeners who might know about ACT, that connection is really important. ACT is all about using cognitive diffusion and acceptance to change behavior.
Exactly. Dr. David has essentially systematized those clinical tools and made them accessible and applicable for everyone, whether you're in a boardroom or at your kitchen table.
And it goes way beyond the personal realm. She's the CEO of a company called Evidence-Based Psychology, and their client list is, well, it's a who's who of global leadership.
It really is. And that shows you how valuable this concept is in high-stakes environments.
Let's look at that list. We're talking about Ernst & Young Global, the UN Development Program, JP Morgan Chase, GlaxoSmithKline. These are serious organizations. So let's take one. Why does an organization like JP Morgan Chase which lives and breathes market volatility, need its leaders to be emotionally agile.
Well, think about it. In high-stakes finance, the ability to unhook from emotion is absolutely critical for rational decision-making. Imagine the market suddenly crashes. The immediate emotional response is panic, fear. The internal voice is screaming, "Sell everything, we're ruined."
Right.
A leader who is fused with that fear might make an impulsive, catastrophic decision. But an emotionally agile leader, they recognize the panic. They think, I am having the thought that we are ruined and I feel intense fear. But then they choose to act based on their deep value of, say, long-term strategy and fiduciary responsibility. They can observe the fear without letting it dictate their trades.
Than a UN development program. That's a totally different world.
Mm.
You're dealing with complex humanitarian crises, cross-cultural conflicts.
The emotional stakes there are immense. In those situations, agility is about handling interpersonal friction and moral stress. When a collaboration is failing, a fused response would be anger, defensiveness, or just withdrawing completely. An agile leader recognizes the frustration, accepts the difficulty, and chooses to act according to a value like diplomacy or collaboration. They re-engage constructively even when every fiber of their being wants to walk away.
So it's the same psychological mechanism whether you're managing personal guilt or a global crisis. The ability to choose values over fear is the common thread.
It is. And her influence is all over the place. She co-edited the Oxford Handbook of Happiness. She's regularly featured in the Harvard Business Review, Time, the Wall Street Journal. It's clear that this is seen as a critical concept across business, media, and academia.
The external validation is huge, too. I mean, look at the endorsements. Susan Cain, who wrote Quiet and Completely Changed How We Think About Introversion, she called this work essential reading.
Which is a massive compliment from someone who so deeply understands our internal lives.
It is. And then you have Daniel Goleman, who basically wrote the book on emotional intelligence. He praised it as an accessible, reader-friendly voyage that can be helpful to anyone.
And that combination is really the sweet spot. You've got the rigor of Yale and Harvard research, but it's presented in a way that, as Goleman says, is accessible to anyone. It's perfect for someone who wants real depth, but doesn't want to get lost in academic jargon.
And for anyone who prefers to listen, we should mention the audiobook. The reviews say the narrator, Claire Gordon-Webster, has a delivery that's well-paced with real-life examples in a neat package. And importantly, they also say it's filled with humor.
Which is so important. It confirms the learning experience is actually engaging. It makes that repeated listening we talked about, which is so crucial for actually adopting this stuff a lot more enjoyable.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. Let's consolidate the core takeaways from this deep dive into Susan David's framework. We started by recognizing that massive, often paralyzing, cognitive burden of the inner critic. Those tens of thousands of thoughts that, through cognitive fusion, start to feel like facts and hold us back.
Then we defined emotional agility, not as being immune to struggle, but as having a flexible and intentional response to it. And that response comes from two core actions: unhooking from the unhelpful patterns, and then pivoting to intentional, values-based action.
And finally, we walk through that structured three-stage path to get there, the AAA process. First, awareness of what your inner voice is actually doing. Second, acceptance and generosity towards your own difficult emotions. And finally, taking action that's guided by your deepest values.
I think the most crucial shift in thinking here is realizing the difference between simply experiencing stress, which everyone does, and allowing that stress to dictate your life choices. That ability to unhook is an act of psychological freedom. It's the freedom to choose your behavior even when there's a storm raging inside your head.
So the essential takeaway for you, the listener, is actually simple, but it's also incredibly profound. Choosing your response wisely isn't a sign of weakness. It's the ultimate act of mental strength. And that choice is what allows you to redefine the relationship you have with your own mind.
So let's leave you with a final provocative thought to explore. As you go into your next challenge, whether it's big or small, just imagine for a day that you were to treat those tens of thousands of internal thoughts not as facts that have to be obeyed, but just as a rich source of opinions. Some are insightful, sure, but many are just fearful. Knowing that those opinions are not mandates, what would your deepest values compel you to choose, to do differently, or to prioritize today, right now, in the face of all that internal noise?